It is the spring of 1964, and a man in a plain grey jacket is pushing a shopping trolley through the aisles of a Kmart store in Columbus, Ohio. He has already put in a bag of birdseed, a pair of work gloves, and a tin of motor oil. He stops at the sporting goods section, behind the glass counter between a rack of fishing rods and a display of hunting vests. Something catches his eye. It is not small, it is not subtle. It is a belt-fed, water-cooled, tripod-mounted machine gun. The same weapon that American soldiers fired from the turrets of Sherman tanks rolling through the streets of liberated Paris, that crews operated from the waists of B-17 bombers over the burning skies of Germany, that infantrymen mounted on jeeps racing across the Rhineland in the final weeks of the war. The price tag reads $13.95. The sign above it says U.S. Military Surplus. M1919 Browning. He calls the assistant over. He asks if it comes with the tripod. It does. This moment in Sabah, and thousands like it in Kmart stores, hardware shops and sporting goods counters across America in the late 1950s and early 1960s, represents something so extraordinary that it strains modern credulity entirely. The M1919 Browning machine gun, one of the most prolific and devastating automatic weapons in the history of warfare, was sold across retail counters to ordinary American civilians for a price that would not have covered a decent pair of shoes. It was legal, it was unremarkable, and it continued until the autumn of 1968, when a single piece of federal legislation ended it with the finality of a bolt slamming home on an empty chamber. This is the full story of 8 million M1919 Browning machine guns, how they were built, how they fought, and what the law of 1968 did to the most powerful weapon ever sold in an American department store. To understand why 8 million machine guns existed at all, one must return to the Western Front in 1917 and the brutal arithmetic of industrial warfare. When American forces arrived in France under General John Pershing, they encountered a battlefield that had already consumed millions of lives in 3 years of unprecedented mechanized slaughter. The dominant tactical fact of that battlefield was the machine gun, a single crew-served weapon firing 400 to 600 rounds per minute from a prepared position could stop a battalion-strength infantry assault in its tracks, killing hundreds of men in minutes, reducing advances measured in miles to advances measured in meters. The United States Army arrived in France without an adequate machine gun of its own design. American industry had not invested in machine gun development during the long years of pre-war isolation, and the weapons available to American commanders in 1917, the French Chauchat, the Hotchkiss, various imported designs, were a heterogeneous collection of borrowed and improvised solutions that satisfied nobody. What America needed was a weapon of its own, reliable, powerful, capable of sustained fire over long periods without catastrophic mechanical failure, and manufacturable in the quantities that American industry could produce once fully mobilized. The request went, as so many American weapons requests of that era did, to John Moses Browning. The prolific Utah designer had already solved the squad automatic weapon problem with the M1918 BIR. Now he was asked to solve the crew-served problem. A weapon heavier and more capable than the BAR, designed to be mounted on a tripod or vehicle, and operated by a dedicated crew, capable of delivering sustained suppressive fire at ranges and volumes that no individual carried weapon could match. Browning's response arrived with characteristic speed. The original M1917 water-cooled machine gun, demonstrated in May 1917, passed its acceptance trials by firing 20,000 rounds continuously without a single stoppage, a performance that left the observing ordnance officers speechless. The weapon was immediately adopted, and production was placed with Westinghouse and Remington Arms. But the M1917, whilst mechanically superb, was heavy. The water jacket that kept the barrel cool added considerable weight and bulk, making the weapon poorly suited to the mobile warfare that American military planners, learning from the stalemate of the trenches, were beginning to envision for the next conflict. The solution was the M1919, an air-cooled variant of the Browning design that replaced the heavy water jacket with a perforated steel barrel jacket that allowed air to circulate around the barrel during firing. This reduction in cooling system weight brought the weapon's total mass down significantly. making it practical for vehicle mounting, aircraft installation, and the kind of mobile infantry support role that would define the warfare of the 1940s. The challenge was that air cooling was inherently less effective than water cooling. Barrels overheated faster, requiring barrel changes during sustained fire. The solution was a quick-change barrel mechanism that an experienced crew could execute in under 30 seconds, maintaining effective fire rates that the tactical situation demanded. The M1919-4, the definitive variant that would serve as the standard American medium machine gun throughout the Second World War, emerged from development work at Springfield Armory in Massachusetts and was standardized in 1934. The weapon was chambered for the .30-06 Springfield cartridge, the same round used in the M1 Garand rifle, and the M1918 bar, a deliberate standardization that simplified the Army's ammunition supply enormously across all its infantry weapons. The M1919A4 measured 104 centimeters in overall length and weighed 14.06 kilograms without its M2 tripod. The tripod itself adding a further 6.35 kilograms, bringing the total weapon system weight to just over 20 kilograms. In practical terms, that was roughly the weight of a large suitcase, fully packed for a fortnight's travel, which gives some sense of the physical demand placed on the two-man crew responsible for carrying, mounting, and operating it in combat conditions. The weapon fed from a 250-round fabric belt of .30-06 ammunition, each belt weighing approximately 3.6 kilograms, and fired at a cyclic rate of between 400 and 550 rounds per minute, a measured, deliberate cadence compared to the ferocious 1,200 rounds per minute of the German MG-42, but one that proved entirely adequate for the sustained fire missions that the M1919 was designed to perform. Manufacturing responsibility for the M1919A4 was distributed across an extraordinary range of American industrial facilities during the war years. Saginaw Steering Gear Division of General Motors in Saginaw, Michigan, became the largest single producer, eventually manufacturing over 280,000 1919A4s, an almost incomprehensible output from a facility that had previously produced automotive steering components. Buffalo Arms Corporation in Buffalo, New York, Rock Island Arsenal in Illinois, and the Savage Arms Company in Utica, New York, all contributed to a production program that eventually yielded, across all M1919 variants, an estimated 1.8 million weapons during the Second World War alone. The total figure of 8 million, cited in popular accounts of the post-war surplus trade, encompasses production across both world wars, interwar manufacture, licensed production by Allied nations, and post-war manufacture for export, a figure for which complete documentation does not always survive in accessible archives, though the broad order of magnitude reflects the extraordinary scale of American machine gun production across the first half of the 20th century. In combat, the M1919A4 proved itself across every theatre of the Second World War with a consistency that silenced even its critics. On the beaches of Normandy, on June 6, 1944, M1919A 4S mounted on the bows of landing craft provided whatever suppressive fire was possible during the catastrophic approach to Omaha Beach, their .30-06 rounds reaching the German positions in the bluffs even as the craft was still 100 metres from the waterline. Ashore, the weapons were dismounted and carried inland by their crews, set up in hastily chosen fire positions to provide the sustained automatic fire that advancing infantry desperately needed. In the Pacific, the M1919A4 found particularly effective employment in the grinding attrition of island clearance. On Iwo Jima in February and March 1945, Marine machine gun crews operated their M1919A4s in almost continuous fire missions against Japanese fortifications that resisted every other form of attack. The sustained .30-06 fire-suppressing defenders long enough for assault teams with flamethrowers and demolition charges to close and destroy individual positions. Veterans of the Pacific Campaign described the sound of the M1919, a measured, deliberate hammering at roughly 7 rounds per second, as simultaneously the most reassuring and most sobering sound on the battlefield, depending entirely on which side of it one stood. the weapon's aircraft-mounted variant, the M1919-4 in flexible gun installations, and the fixed-gun M2 variant, armed American bombers and fighters from the earliest days of the air war through to the final missions over Japan. 17. Flying Fortress crews operated M1919 type guns from nose, waist, tail, and dorsal positions, the weapon's sustained fire capability proving essential in the defensive battles against Luftwaffe fighter interception over Germany. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The German approach to the medium machine gun problem had taken a fundamentally different philosophical direction, and the comparison between the M1919A4 and the MG42 illuminates the contrasting tactical doctrines of the two armies with particular clarity. The MG42, entering service in 1942, was designed around a single uncompromising priority: maximum rate of fire. Its cyclic rate of approximately 1,200 rounds per minute, more than double the M1919A4's, produced the distinctive buzzing sound that Allied soldiers quickly learned to identify, and feared with good reason. A single MG42 crew could theoretically deliver as much fire in 1 minute as 3 M1919A4 crews operating simultaneously. The cost of this performance was ammunition consumption of almost unsustainable proportions. An MG42 firing at full cyclic rate emptied a 50-round belt in under 3 seconds, a rate that placed extraordinary demands on German ammunition supply systems that were already strained beyond capacity by 1944. The M1919A. 4's more conservative rate of fire, by contrast, allowed its crews to manage their ammunition expenditure with deliberate economy, sustaining effective fire for longer periods between resupply. In the attritional battles of the later war years, that sustainability proved a significant practical advantage. The British Vickers machine gun, a water-cooled design directly descended from the original Maxim, served throughout the Second World War in the sustained fire role, with a reliability that was almost legendary among the soldiers who operated it. The Vickers had entered service in 1912 and was still firing effectively in 1945, a testament to the soundness of its fundamental design. It was heavier than the M1919A4 at approximately 18 kilograms for the gun alone, but its water cooling allowed indefinite sustained fire without barrel changes, a capability that the air-cooled American weapon could not match. The two weapons occupied slightly different tactical niches rather than being direct equivalents. The Soviet Maxim M1910, similarly water-cooled and similarly ancient in its basic lineage, served Red Army units throughout the war with the same combination of reliability and weight that characterized the Vickers. Soviet machine gun doctrine emphasized massed fire from concentrated positions, a philosophy that suited the Maxim's sustained fire capability but limited the tactical flexibility that the lighter, more mobile, 1919A4 provided to American commanders. The end of the Second World War found the United States Army in possession of machine guns in quantities that defied straightforward management. Weapons returned from every theatre of the war, from the Pacific Islands, from the German heartland, from the North African desert, joined the new production that had continued until the very last weeks of fighting. Arsenals across the continental United States filled with M1919A4s in various states of wear, many still in the Cosmoline preservative, in which they had been shipped, many cleaned and refurbished by ordnance crews, preparing them for long-term storage. The Korean War consumed significant quantities and demonstrated that the M1919A4 remained an entirely viable weapon against a modern enemy in 1950, but it also accelerated the Army's thinking about replacement. By the late 1950s, with the M60 general-purpose machine gun in development, and the military beginning its long transition to 7.62mm NATO standardization, the .30-06 M1919, A4 began its journey from active inventory to surplus commodity. Through the mechanisms of the civilian marksmanship program and direct commercial surplus sales, M1919A4s began appearing in the retail landscape that characterized post-war American consumer culture. Kmart, the great American discount retail chain that had opened its first store in Garden City, Michigan, in March 1962, and was expanding at extraordinary speed across the American heartland, became one of the most prominent retail outlets for surplus military hardware, including the M1919A4. The $13.95 price point placed a weapon that had cost the government hundreds of dollars to manufacture within reach of virtually any working American, a transaction whose casualness reflected the era's entirely different relationship between military surplus and civilian commerce. The Gun Control Act of 1968 ended this commerce with an abruptness that still astonishes those who study the period. Signed by President Lyndon Johnson on October 22, 1968, the Act's provisions dismantled in a single legislative moment the entire infrastructure through which weapons like the M1919A4 had reached retail counters. Mail-order sales ended. Dealer licensing requirements tightened dramatically. The pipeline from government arsenal to Kmart sporting goods counter closed permanently and irrevocably. The M1919 A4S already in civilian hands, legally purchased, legally owned, stayed where they were. They remain there today, in the gun cabinets and collections and estates of American families who bought them when they were surplus tools rather than regulated artefacts. Those registered under the National Firearms Act before the May 1986 closure of the transferable machine gun registry now command prices on the collector market of between $8,000 and $15,000 for standard examples, with particularly fine or documented specimens reaching considerably higher. The $13.95 Kmart machine gun has become, through the alchemy of legislation and the passage of decades, one of the most valuable civilian legal firearms in America. Return then to that man in the grey jacket, pushing his shopping trolley through the Kmart in Columbus, Ohio. He is asking the assistant whether the tripod is included. He does not know that he is standing at the end of an era. He does not know that within 4 years, this transaction, this entirely ordinary retail purchase of a belt-fed machine gun between a discount store and a working man, will be made permanently impossible by federal law. He does not know that the weapon he is about to buy for $13.95 will one day be worth 1,000 times that figure. He knows only that it is a Browning. He knows that it works. And he knows that $13.95 is a very reasonable price for something that helped win a world war. 8 million of them were made. They flew over Germany and churned across Pacific beaches and held frozen Korean ridgelines and ended up with the magnificent absurdity that characterizes so much of American post-war history in a Kmart sporting goods section between the fishing rods and the hunting vests. John Moses Browning designed the M1919 to be the most reliable machine gun ever built. He succeeded beyond any reasonable measure. It was reliable in the Arctic, reliable in the jungle, reliable in the desert, reliable on the shop floor in Columbus, Ohio, where a man in a grey jacket was about to wheel it home in a shopping trolley. Some weapons outlast the wars that made them. The M1919, Browning outlasted everything.